Krystal, what are you taking a look at?
Well, faced with collapsing poll numbers among young Americans and a completely stalled economic agenda, President Biden is finally considering some limited measures of student debt relief. Probably no more than $10,000 and probably limited by income. There will be a million debates over how the politics of all of this will play out. Personally, I'd expect it to be a net positive, given that the primary problem Democrats face right now is complete demoralization and apathy of their base. At least if you deliver something materially beneficial to some part of your base, you might give them a reason to think Democrats are worth re-electing. I am quite confident it will be insufficient to turn the tables on the disastrous midterm situation Dems are facing down right now. But today I want to consider the moral justifications for student debt cancellation. Now, the TLDR of the moral case is really pretty simple. The holders of this massive and future-destroying student debt burden are victims of government-backed fraud. That's really how it is. In fact, the student loan debt crisis and the housing debt crisis are twin evils which have devastated millions of Americans. They were birthed in the disaster of Clinton-era radical neoliberalism. Both were bootstrapping market-based solutions to the failures of neoliberalism, and they were pushed by an unholy alliance of government and business. This philosophy said, the government's going to abandon workers' unions and decimate middle-class blue-collar jobs with a disastrous corporate-backed trade policy. We will privatize everything and allow life to become more and more precarious, with stagnating wages, exploding healthcare costs, and risky 401ks instead of guaranteed pensions. And instead of doing a single collective thing to compensate for the way that we are systematically destroying the path to the American dream, we're instead going to push the market-based, individualized solutions of college and home ownership for everyone. Here's Bill Clinton laying it out pretty clearly.
No person, even the president, can look at these young people and say, I will guarantee you, no matter what happens in the global economy, you will always have the job you have today, and you'll make more money next year than you did this year. You know no one can guarantee that in the global economy. That's not the way the world works anymore. But we can guarantee to people that we're going to empower them to help themselves. We'll make home ownership more accessible. We'll make lifetime education and training more accessible. We'll make the things that make life work for people who are trying to do the best they can for themselves there. We have to begin with the basic things that make it worth doing.
Now, I think education and home ownership are wonderful things, although by no means do I think it makes sense for everyone to go to a four-year college. But Bill Clinton and the neoliberals who came after him did not go about their project by, say, subsidizing and scaling affordable housing, nor did they do what many nations have done by making college free, or even what we did in our own past by making college extremely affordable. Instead, they pushed Americans to take on ever-expanding amounts of debt, while allowing the costs of both housing and college to skyrocket at astronomical rates. Our government pushed the edict that you either must get in the game with loads of debt and compete for your slot in the meritocracy or die. It was a personal responsibility narrative that pushed the most reckless financial oblivion as if it was sound decision-making, while at the same time closing every other pathway to stability. So, if you wanted a modicum of stability, what other choice did you really have? What choice was there but to take on the tens of thousands of dollars in student loan debt, or to take on the hundreds of thousands of dollars in housing debt with payments that were escalating impossibly out of reach? To not do those things was actually even crazier. If you took the prescribed course offered by the politicians and their capitalist allies, then the path to middle-class stability was a narrow ledge along a rocky cliff. And if you didn't, it was a nosedive straight into the rocks. Now, we all saw what happened with the housing crash. Wall Street was bailed out, but we were told we couldn't bail out the homeowners because they'd been reckless. They'd been irresponsible. That was the narrative pushed overwhelmingly by the right. Remember Rick Santelli yelling about moral hazard and asking, how many of you people want to pay for your neighbor's mortgage that has an extra bathroom and can't pay their bills? You see what he did there? Taking behavior that was pushed by our government and by Santelli's Wall Street buddies as the correct and responsible thing to do, the only path to middle-class respectability. He took that thing and he flipped it to turn it into something that was indulgent and reckless. This view was ultimately accepted by the Obama-era Democrats who left homeowners to wither and die on the vine. And here I will make a political point, which is that I have no doubt that the Obama admin decided not to act to help homeowners because the polling was bad. Doing what was just and required may well have triggered a short-term political backlash, but it's now as clear as day that no single decision may have more directly led to the rise of Trump than abandoning Americans and their communities in their hour of need, but easily finding the money to feed the pigs at the Wall Street trough. The arguments made now against any and all student debt cancellation sound eerily familiar to the ones made against help for homeowners. The same narrative pitting those who were supposedly responsible and saved ahead of time for their college or, quote, worked their butt off to pay off their debt sound a lot like the arguments about the good and responsible homeowners versus the reckless and irresponsible homeowners. First of all, both of these narratives ignore the outright fraud and abuse endemic in both systems. The mortgage brokers who targeted immigrants and the elderly and lied to them about their loan terms, or even went so far as to forge their signatures on mortgage products that they never actually agreed to. The fly-by-night for-profit colleges, promising everything and leaving students with nothing but a lifetime of debt and misery. Or the more respectable versions of this, like NYU, we covered this year, which charges students insane amounts of money, saddling them with some of the highest debt loads in the country for degrees that lead them nowhere in terms of the job market. The practices there are so outright exploitative that one female student at least was forced to sell her own eggs in order to afford this scam education. But the big thing these narratives ignore is that the divide between those who paid off their college and will struggle their entire lives with debt isn't about moral character. It's about luck, and it's about class. A much clearer dividing line is whether or not your parents were well off enough to avail themselves of the tax-free college savings accounts that are, by the way, a direct subsidy to upper middle class families. After all, low-income people are disproportionately burdened by student debt, and the largest shares of student debt are held by the individuals with the least wealth. There's one more piece of this too. A college education is not exactly living up to its promise anymore. This is extremely obvious if you watch what is happening right now in the Amazon and Starbucks labor union movements. Noam Scheiber actually had a good report on this. Increasingly after the Great Recession, college-educated workers found themselves working at Starbucks or Amazon or other service sector blue-collar jobs in order to be able to make ends meet and be able to afford some kind of health care. Scheiber writes of these workers, quote, "They have a sense that the economic grand bargain available to their parents, go to college, work hard, enjoy a comfortable lifestyle, has broken down, and they see unionizing as a way to resurrect it. And by the way, they are correct. In the long run, unionizing the service sector is a way more likely path to the good life than just continuing to follow these politicians and their billionaire capitalist buddies down the debt-laden primrose path. These failed promises have radicalized 2 generations now, pushing them to Occupy Wall Street and the Bernie campaign, and now to the burgeoning new labor movement. After all, 57% of Gen Zers, they're going to go to college, more than any other generation. Yet they are likely to follow the path of millennials, achieving every single life milestone from marriage to family to home ownership at a later date than boomers or the silent generation. Now, one of the key reasons why is because of that crushing weight of student debt that handcuffs them for literally decades. This is not a failure of personal responsibility. It is fraud, mass fraud, perpetrated on millions, which deserves redress, and perpetrated most crushingly on those attending college during the pandemic, by the way, when they didn't even benefit from on-campus life. Debt cancellation is not a full solution, of course, especially not the timid, piddling, and means-tested version that Biden is likely to offer, if he bothers to offer anything at all. And of course, it does not address the wrongs done to many victims of neoliberalism. But it's a start, and an initial national recognition that what has been done to these people is wrong, and it needs to be fixed. The American people deserve better than lies, market-based fairy tales, and crushing debt. They deserve jobs, health care, and dignity. In lieu of serious steps to secure any of these, at the very least, we can do a bit to lighten their load. I think that statistic about how with every cable news is ripping us apart, dividing the country, making it impossible to function as a society, and making it impossible to know just what is true and what is false. But the good news is they are failing and they know it.
That is why we're building something new, a new mainstream, a healthier one, something more trustworthy, something that we are going to need in one of the most pivotal times in American history. We are building up here for the midterms, for the upcoming presidential election, but we need your help. So if you can help us out by becoming a premium member today at breakingpoints.com, we're trying to change America for the better and the entire world.
So what are you waiting for, guys? Go to breakingpoints.com and sign up and help us build a new mainstream.